Today, we become legends.
Yep, it's that time again. It took me a while to decide to rant on Bishtar, but my god is she broken. Where to even start with this? I guess we'll just go in ability order, starting with the best steroid in the game and arguably one of the best basic abilities outright. That for some reason high-res dot buffing was a good idea after launch. The fact that they immediately backpedaled a few patches later is kind of funny. Skipping over the passive here since I think it's genuinely fine. A nice boost to attack speed and movement speed with some conditions to fill to get that. No issues there really. Her one though is basically a Swiss Army knife of Hunter steroids. Of course everyone's already made the comparison to Hachiman's one and I've gone into detail on this in other videos, but comparing these two abilities really is like the US military launching a ground assault on one of those uncontacted island tribes that still lives in the Stone Age. Ishtar's version is just infinitely more advanced, and not only does it do Hachiman's one but better, it also does Sylvana Sorto's but better, and a powerful unique effect that no other god really has. Oh, and all this for a longer duration than any other steroid in the entire game, not counting conditional ones like Gilgamesh 1. Like, if you weren't convinced already that high-res deliberately releases broken god releases for publicity and hype, buffing the duration of this steroid that was already best in class 2 patches after her launch is just proof of this. Now, just because I know I'll get several comments saying OP god releases are actually good for the game, I do kind of understand this argument. But for starters, she was already a strong god release without this buff and she did not need it. And second, I would literally rather they buff any other part of her kit than buffing this. It was and still is her best ability by a wide margin, so why did it need a longer duration and more damage? Again, the fact that they immediately reverted this shows that they really just did this for hype and they knew it was a bad idea. This ability alone not only gives her insane early game with Strike Shot Wave Clear, but also insane late game and poking in teamfights with Storm Shot. There's nothing this ability doesn't do, it's a perfect ability, which is why it pisses me off so much to see that they buffed it after launch. If anything was changed with this ability, it should have been a cooldown nerf, not a buff. But anyway, I digress. This ability has been ripped to pieces enough already by me and others, so let's move on to other aspects of Bishtar's kit that I hate. Skipping over the two, since besides it being a bit clunky and kind of feeling bad to use, I have no real issues with it. So next we arrive at Bishtar's 3, Jolt. So with her electric themes and an ability like Jolt, I think this pretty much confirms my theory that Ishtar is the Pikachu of Smite. Favourite of the devs that is way more OP than they realistically should be. This ability is low-key bonkers, and no one actually talks about it. I guess her one draws all of the attention for being as busted as it is, but this ability deals 300 base plus 60% power and 110% basic attack power. So already, that's 300 plus 170% scaling on a basic ability. To put that number in context, the average power scaling of Hunter Ultimates is 129%. This ability has over 40% more power scaling than your average Hunter Ultimate, which are already some of the highest physical scaling abilities in the entire game. This is only outclassed by a handful of these, and most are multi-hit like Anher or Hu Yi, where it's often hard or near impossible to land all of the hits anyway. Ishtar's Dash does 170% scaling in one burst. Or I guess technically 2 bursts, but the follow-up shot is nearly instant anyway. Oh, and also 110% of that 170% total is actually basic attack power scaling, not just physical power scaling, which adds on an extra 36 to 89 base damage depending on Ishtar's level because of base auto power.
But I'm not done yet!
Since that second hit that scales off of basic attack power is literally classed as a basic attack, it can trigger basic attack item effects and can crit. Why? Don't get me wrong, it's a cool mechanic, and in terms of design aspects, I'm very happy they're experimenting more with abilities proccing in-hand effects after removing it from so many abilities over time. But from a balance point of view, just why? We all know how strong crit builds are at the moment, and so if on a random roughly 50-50 chance depending on builds this ability crits, it instead hits for 280% of your physical power. No joke, that might be the highest physical scaling ability in the entire game. It even beats out Anher's ult, which is legendary for its insane damage if all 8 of the spears land. That does 240% for reference. If anything actually does outscale this ability on the physical power side, then let me know down below, but I imagine if anything does, it will be some kind of massive multi-hit ultimate that you're not really expected to land every single hit from anyway. As I mentioned before, Bishtar's Dash is basically instant and guaranteed damage. It's not some kind of multi-hit where you're only going to hit half the shots. Now, of course, the base damage stays the same at 300, and most of these ults I've mentioned do significantly more base damage than Jolt, and therefore will do more damage overall. But the fact that a movement ability can outscale standing in a Hu Yi ult for the entire duration is just crazy to me, and it's not even unrealistic. As I said, with just Shadow Shield and Wind Demon, it's a 40% chance to scale at 280% power. Add in Deathbringer, and that's a 65% chance to do so, plus even more damage from the Deathbringer passive, bringing the overall scaling of the ability to more than 300%. A dash simply has no business dealing anywhere near 170% scaling, never mind close to 300%. Thank God Hydra's only activates on ability completion and not ability start, otherwise you could do even more bullshit by proccing Hydra's on that crit basic on the follow-up for 40% more damage. That does sound kind of fun though, which is why I mentioned this mechanic is kind of cool, but the balance is just way off. Massively nerf the scaling, and this ability could be really awesome. At the very least, just entirely remove the 60% normal scaling on the ability and make it so it only has 110% of basic attack power. But honestly, I'd be okay with them taking that down to 100% for consistency's sake. So that was a long time to spend on just the damage of this ability, but I felt it was warranted given how ridiculous it is. But this is also just a really good dash in general. It's fast, can be used aggressively as we've seen, and gives a pretty long window of immunity frames on the backflip similar to a Wheelix's Feather Step, which is super valuable on a hunter for safety reasons. The only downside to this ability it has is that it has Medusa Dash Syndrome, where it can easily be blocked to prevent Ishtar's escape from a dive. But given the body blocking enemy probably takes 1000 damage from this anyway, I think it's sort of worthwhile as a trade-off for everything else this ability does for Ishtar. Damn, that was probably the longest I've ever gone ranting on a single ability, and that wasn't even for her 1. Though in fairness, I could have gone much longer on her 1 in terms of how it outranges everything, outdamages everything, outclears everything, etc. But I've already covered it in great detail in other videos, and I feel everyone already knows how busted it is, so I kept it short. But moving on to my final rantable ability, we have Ishtar's ultimate, Blaze of Retribution. So despite being the least offensive ability out of the 3 I've covered, this is still one of the best hunter ultimates in the game for all it does. 2 different CCs that combo into each other without DR, since cripples are soft CC and won't DR the stun, making it pretty much guaranteed to land unless the enemy jumps the initial startup of the ability, which is very hard to do. It also can deal up to 800 base and 112% scaling, which, while insane, I will admit that you aren't going to get that level of damage all the time. For max damage, you need all 5 blades to hit both on the outswing and the return swing, which is pretty unrealistic unless you're using it on someone in melee range that's diving you. Since the blades originate from and return to Ishtar, all 10 will land on an enemy that's right in front of you in melee range, but due to the way the damage scales down per blade, even hitting just 3 blades on the way out and back in, it still gives you great damage at 672 base and 95% scaling, which is in line with most other hunter ults that do burst damage. It of course is outclassed by the likes of Anhur and Hu Yi, but as I mentioned before, it's unrealistic to count every single hit for those, and their damage is over a long period of time, and inevitably a few of those hits will miss under most circumstances. But not only does this ability do solid damage, it also has those 2 CCs I mentioned before, and combos super well with her dash as well, to allow most of the return swing blades to hit. Oh, and did I mention this ability has 80 range? Yep, 80. Ranged basic attacks are 55 for comparison, so this ability can hit from miles out of standard boxing range and is only 5 units shorter than Thoth's 1 through Glyph, which we all know is some of the most insane poke in the game. This ult can actually hit slightly behind a tower when Ishtar stands on the edge of its radius, which is just insane, especially when she can follow up with her 1 Storm Shot basic attacks, which also have 80 range when you stun the enemy with this. But yeah, despite being her least crazy ability out of all 3, this ult is still well above average for hunters and has CC that rivals a warrior ult but on a hunter. Pretty nuts. But that's enough ranting for one day. Let me know your thoughts on Bishtar down below. Did you know how truly busted the damage on her dash was before watching the video? Because honestly, I didn't before doing the research. I knew it hit hard, but I didn't know the true extent of the numbers until doing the math. Let me know who else I should rant on next, and I will catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.